Thank you for joining us on this rainy night. My name is Spencer Morgan. I'm the executive director here at the Theodore Roosevelt inaugural site. I'm so glad that you could be with us and join us. For those of you who are online, welcome. And those of you who are in person, welcome as well. Just to point out, we do have a new rotating exhibit just behind us in the rotating exhibit hall focused on voting and the history of voting in this country. It's very interesting. Plays a little in with our theme tonight as well. So please check that out after the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's program, Speak Softly and Wield a Big Pen with Adam Zyglis. I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items here. There will be a Q&A portion after the talk, so please be sure to raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over to you for those in person. And those of you who are online, please just put your question in the chat and our lovely assistant Pat in the back will read your question aloud for Adam. For those of you who couldn't see, Pat was waving in the back. There will be refreshments over to the side. Please enjoy. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Adam Zyglis this evening. Adam is a Pulitzer-Prize-winning editorial cartoonist here at the Buffalo News. You are internationally syndicated, which is no small feat. And you're an avid Adirondack mountain hiker, something I didn't know. So you fit in really well with TR in a lot of ways. He is also Buffalo born and raised. So we are very happy to have joining us this evening, Buffalo's own Adam Zyglis.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for having me. To everybody at the TR site. It's like a home away from home now that we host, that you guys host the Editorial Cartoon Contest Award Ceremony for our Western New York students. A week from today, we're honoring a bunch of really talented young artists. So I'm very excited about that. So this will be a lot of fun. So we're gonna sort of jump all over the place. Before I begin, I'll let you know what to expect from the lecture tonight, or the discussion, I should say. And, generally, I want you to take away from this an appreciation for the craft of editorial cartooning and, really the importance of cartooning in America, which sounds kind of silly. Why are cartoons that important? But if leaving tonight, hopefully you can get a renewed perspective on how editorial cartoons strengthen our freedom of expression and are really essential to a vibrant democracy. And in this context of the TR site, I would love to sort of, talk about like how cartooning is different from the time of TR and how it's essentially remained the same in many ways since our inception as a country. Just one second, I'll try to get that out of your way. The cartoon I have up to hold the spot here for the title page is a cartoon I drew after the Charlie Hebdo shootings in France when the cartoonists were killed by extremists for drawing the Prophet Muhammad. So I thought it was just a nice wielding a big pen kind of image, but it's also a nice way to show how we really were gifted our freedom of expression, especially through cartooning, our tradition from France. France has a great tradition and free expression and satire and editorial cartooning. And, we took many things from Europe, including cartooning from France, and the Statue of Liberty was also a gift. So the essence of an editorial cartoon really has remained the same since cartooning began in America. It's a form of graphic art that expresses a message, an editorial message, an opinion through a creative concept. And so there's always that creative idea or that creative concept. Now, over time, the way these cartoons have looked may change. And I think everything else really has changed in terms of the landscape, the media landscape. And as I go through the presentation, I'll show you I'll give you sort of an inside peek into really the challenges, especially today, of drawing editorial cartoons. So, the famous expression with Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick. So I thought, that Teddy Roosevelt was so cartoon friendly. And he was a president at the pinnacle of American editorial cartooning in many ways. There were estimates of over 2,000 staff editorial cartoonists in America when Teddy Roosevelt was president in the early 1900s, the turn of the 20th century. And that's because most cities had multiple newspapers, and each newspaper had multiple cartoonists. And then there were, on top of that, there were magazines that were strictly dedicated to illustration and satire, like Puck Magazine, Judge, and these magazines were highly popular. Today, we have obviously such a fractured media landscape. So all of the media people consumed were newspapers or magazines. So because of that, there was just a prolific amount of illustrators and editorial cartoonists. Fast forward to today, cartoons are ironically as popular as ever because of the internet. The editorial cartoon is really the original meme. You know, it's like the fine wine of memes it's become. But now there are probably about 40 full-time staff editorial cartoonists left from that 2000. Granted, there's probably 150 or so artists working to create cartoons in some way, but they're just not on staff full-time at a newspaper. But Teddy Roosevelt was, in many ways, other than Donald Trump, a favorite of all cartoonists. Today, Donald Trump has become possibly the most drawn president, along with Teddy Roosevelt. And the two of them it's an interesting study because Teddy Roosevelt, why he was so popular with cartoonists was because, in many ways, he was loved by both sides of the political spectrum. Both of them, though, Trump and Teddy Roosevelt, created a lot of news and a lot of big items with their policies. A lot of talk, a lot of stir. But the bipartisan support for Teddy Roosevelt and his visual, just sort of, you know, juiciness to caricature with the mustache, his glasses, it was a cartoonist dream. And Donald Trump has the same juiciness when it comes to his visuals and the hair and the tie, but in an opposite way, he's more divisive. You know, with a lower approval, but both camps have very strong opinions about him for or against. So because of that, he's become a cartoonist dream as well. So looking back, cartoonists like Joe Kepler, this is a typical editorial cartoon. They looked like beautiful storybook illustrations. You know, the art was more fine crafted, and so the look and feel was much different. And this is just sort of him waiting for the Democratic challenger, because he was so powerful politically and so popular. But Teddy Roosevelt, up till today, is being drawn in editorial cartoons. This is a cartoon by my colleague, David Horsey, and I'll read it to you because it's hard to make out some of the words. It says, "Admit it, we got ourselves elected to Congress with corporate money so we could protect corporate interests and get lucrative jobs lobbying for corporations when we retire. Well, yes, let's not talk about it right here," with the looming stare of Teddy Roosevelt. So his reputation as a president and a man of integrity and, you know, with such stature, that remains today. And I feel like that was something that carried through with cartoons from his time, like this one. I myself have drawn Teddy Roosevelt probably 3 or 4 times in cartoons. This was not an editorial cartoon, but this was a book illustration for the book review page in the Buffalo News. And it depicted the struggle or the battle for the control of the Republican Party with Taft, his successor. And I have, you know, the muckraking that Teddy's doing with his right hand. So this was more of an editorial illustration. Then you have in Puck Magazine taking on the very same topic. This cartoonist take is that he's passing off the baby to Taft to take care of his old policies. So it looks like less of a struggle in this case, and more of a friendly arrangement. So obviously the imagery of TR was just incredible, especially the big stick and his caricature. So with freedom of expression, like we have it in America, is unabated and it's strong, cartoonists really provide many functions. Cartoons, like in this case, essentially summarize and capture the moment we are in time with visual metaphor and make it easily digestible for the masses, for people who can't read, or for those who can but love all the nuance and layers that cartoonists will put in. cartoonists also provide a function of creating a lot of our popular symbolism and imagery we've had in America. This is a Thomas Nast cartoon. And this was the first time he used the Republican Party as an elephant. It actually says the Republican vote was the first symbol he used. And it was just a metaphor in the jungle with animals. And then over time, he repeated this. And eventually, the Republican Party became known as the elephant. And that came from Thomas Nast. Same with the donkey. Now, another cartoonist connected to TR also created an American symbol. And please correct me if I'm wrong on this. You guys would know better than me. But this is a cartoon by, it's a Berryman, Clifford Berryman. And Clifford Berryman is there's a namesake, there's an award in Washington after this cartoonist. This is a cartoon that ran in the Washington Post, a Berryman cartoon in 1902. And this was almost just depicting a story. So some cartoons, like especially at this point in history, because photography wasn't as prevalent and social media wasn't there, he was drawing what happened because no one could, at the time, was there to take a photo of it. But this was the story of in Mississippi, where he went on a hunting trip, and Teddy Roosevelt loved hunting, as we all know. And his hunting partner had basically cornered or tied like a helpless black bear to a tree for him to shoot. And Teddy, being the man full of character that he is, he's like, no, I'm not going to shoot that bear. So he declined, and so this captured that moment. And as I've read, is it a store, I think in New York State, marketed a bear and called it a teddy bear for the first time. That was sort of the birth of the teddy bear. Mark, is this correct? Have you? Yeah. Let me know if I fudge any of the errors. But again, a cartoonist helped codify that into our culture. So cartoons, because they're so easily consumable and they are reaching a mass audience and they're visual, when something enters the realm of cartoon, it takes on a life of its own, which is sort of the beauty of it. So that's creating these popular American symbols. That's sort of one function of a full free press with editorial cartooning. Another one, and this is considered the first American editorial cartoon, is just a call to action or a rally cry. And that's a type of cartoon that you'll see from the 1700s, like this Ben Franklin cartoon, up to today, as some cartoons will just sort of get our attention to an important issue and act as a rally cry. So this, you've all seen this and are familiar with it. It's a woodcut image that Ben Franklin created with the 8 colonies as the segments of the snake. And this was actually done before the Revolutionary War. It was for the 7 Years' War, to rally support, to have everyone unite. And it became an emblem for the revolution as well. But what was nice about this really is a super modern editorial cartoon because it's clean and simple and conceptual, and it has that little bit of pop culture in there. At the time, there was this folklore that if you cut a snake into pieces and put it back together before dawn or dusk, I forget how it goes, it'll come back to life. So he's sort of poking fun at some kind of, current culture in a way. And that's what a great editorial cartoon has, those little nuggets, or they're infused with a little bit of current culture of the day. So this is kind of really like a classic modern editorial cartoon. So the other function of an editorial cartoon is to sort of hold those in power accountable, or use satire to ridicule our leaders. And that is really the best form of free speech, because as soon as we cannot ridicule our leaders, we start to run into problems. And so here I have, this was back in 2016, speak softly and carry a big stick. We have TR, and then you have Trump tweeting and walking into the stick of a rake. So just contrasting the sort of, the approach of two different presidents. Now, where do we get these freedoms? We take for granted that we can, as editorial cartoonists in America, can ridicule like a sitting president, which seems like that's our job, right? Like, as we would assume. It turns out if we look overseas to countries that do not have free expression or full democracies, and by the way, America really does not have the truest democracy at the moment. Our freedoms have been slowly eroding, so we really need to continue to fight to not only preserve what we have, but to increase the freedoms that we do have. When I served as president of my cartooning association, it's the AAEC, Association of American Editorial Cartoonists. It's such a really great group of people. The coolest thing that happened to me when I was president of the group was I got to work with an organization called Cartoonist Rights International. So we work closely with this international group that protects foreign cartoonists from legal threat, from jail, from physical threat. There are all kinds of things. So we will often provide money or legal help to get cartoonists out of the country when the government is trying to seize them or detain them. And for the first time, we're so focused on America here in America. We're very America-centric. And it was a great, excuse to say, let's look around the country or around the world here and see what's happening. And every year there are cartoonists that are under threat. And in this case, for me, these cases stuck with me because I was president. And this one is a reoccurring case. But this woman is Atina Farghadani. She's an artist in Iran. And back in 2014, she drew this illustration, this cartoon of parliament, of Iranian parliament. And they're putting their votes in that fishbowl, and they're voting to take away rights from women. And she depicted them as animals. So, as an American reader, you're like, what's the big deal? She was arrested and charged with various crimes. And she was sentenced to 12 years and 9 months in prison. And she did serve, I want to say, 18 months. There was a lot of international pressure to release her. But this was not uncommon. And I mean, this April, she again was arrested for propaganda, for drawing pictures. A year ago, she was arrested. So this is something that is happening in overseas in regimes that do not like free expression. And an editorial cartoon is visual and cuts beyond words to groups of people that may speak different languages. And the satire and ridicule that are embedded in a cartoon can really burn and sting to a dictator. So these are important tools, even though they don't look at it at their surface. They're important tools in democracy. This next cartoonist is, and this was around the same time. This is a few years later. This is Musa Kart on the left. And he's a cartoonist that for decades would draw cartoons pointing out corruption. He lives in Turkey. And the figure off in the distance, tall, is President Erdogan. And he had been elected and then threw dozens and dozens of people in jail that were, drawing or writing, unflattering things. So he was charged with terrorism for these drawings and was charged to nearly 4 years in prison. This is my drawing of Erdogan with his mustache, with his prisoners inside. So in America here, we can depict our leaders as animals and not go to prison. We could possibly go to Facebook jail, but not actual jail. So this was drawn. This cartoon is in 2017. Early in the Trump presidency, when it was just depicting that vicious nature of he attacks the media, but he needs them. He attacks them, but he needs them. We can also draw them as parts of animals. And this was possibly the farthest I may have gone with a cartoon. And I was, this is very pro John McCain. That's my defense. My editor actually afterward, my editors see the rough sketch, and my editor at the time, Mike Conley, he was just messaging me. He's a great guy. He's no longer at the paper, but I remember having this published in Buffalo Spree after as just one of my cartoons. And he was like, I don't remember the detail. I think the rough sketch that he sees doesn't have all the detail, but this may not be something I would do in the news again. But it was the perfect metaphor for John McCain's job as in the Republican Party. He was on cleanup duty in a lot of ways. This was, I think, when he was attacking Marine veterans, and McCain would have to really sort of rush to everyone's defense after comments that Trump would make. So where do we as cartoonists in America get all those freedoms to ridicule and to use all these images? Obviously, the First Amendment of the Constitution, where we're granted free expression. But it also goes back to a Supreme Court case that sort of upheld that. And that's sort of the Supreme Court precedent that protected cartoonists is called Hustler Magazine versus Falwell. And this is a movie they made a few years after the Supreme Court, because I don't know if you saw this movie. It's pretty good. Woody Harrelson, it's very good. I think it's Courtney Love's actually in the movie, and Edward Norton. So this was this historical fiction account of the case. The case revolves around this ad, this image. This is a piece of satire. So Hustler Magazine would print these fake ads. Like it's a piece of satire. So this was a fake ad for a satirical ad for Campari. And it was a Q&A with Jerry Falwell about his first time. And his first time was with his mother in an outhouse, it turns out. It's very, very, very crude, very lowbrow and terrible. But it's important that if a public figure is ridiculed and they can sue and successfully win for being offended by something, then a judge, a politician can sue a cartoonist for an offensive caricature. So our association, this was 1988 was the Supreme Court case. At the time, I mean, I was 6 years old, I think. That dates me a little bit. But the Association of Cartoonists, they supported and I think may have like donated to the cause, and were very supportive of this because this was critical in future precedent for cartooning. And Hustler Magazine did win. Jerry Falwell had claimed that it was intentionally like inflicting emotional distress and libel. And what was really interesting is in the decision, it was written by William Rehnquist, the Supreme Court Justice at the time, and he is a big cartooning fan. And I've heard he's gotten cartoons from Conrad and famous cartoonists, so he loves the craft. And in his judgment, he wrote about cartooning and said, this, like the tradition of American cartooning, is sacred, and this is what makes America, America. I should have actually pulled a clip, or I mean, this is me just paraphrasing, but it's very cool that became really a linchpin in holding our free expression. Now that we have a new Supreme Court, like who knows what's going to happen if something like this comes again, because we have new threats. So legal threats and threats of the government. So this is a satirical ad I made for Absolute vodka, not Campari, but having absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is during the Trump administration when they were talking of pardoning all these people that were breaking the law and were under investigation. So, over time, this time I was going to like get into some of the newer challenges to editorial cartooning, to free expression, essentially. And during the Trump administration, for the first time in a long time, it was government censorship, or the fear or the prospect of government restricting free expression in things that Trump would say or hint at that he would do. And even saying things. This cartoon is a 4-part cartoon, says this calls for retribution with different authoritarian regimes. China, that detains poets and artists and writers. Iran, detained Latina Farghadani and many others. Turkey, and Trump having him complain on and on about SNL skits about Alec Baldwin, that we need retribution and they would punish NBC somehow. And even though he's not passing a law or he's not actually doing anything, the power of the bully pulpit with Trump saying that has a chilling effect, him even saying that. So that's sort of like the first step. And that's where speaking out against something like that was very important. So there was a pattern. He was calling for retribution for SNL skits. And in here, calling the press the enemy of the people on more than one occasion. It was a refrain of his. Meanwhile, chumming up with dictators like Putin and Kim Jong-un. Also chumming up with Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi Arabia, who was connected with the just grisly murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which is the nasty scene underneath there. This is just satirically having him pardon a turkey at Thanksgiving along with the vulture here. But you know, that again, that move of him not acknowledging it and you know, is just another notch in terms of journalists and cartoonists seeing that this is going in a bad direction for free expression. And another turn was when there's the White House press pool during the Trump administration. This was when he removed the credentials from the CNN reporter, Costa, I believe it was. So that was happening. This is now on to during this time, when everyone's focused on the Trump administration, there was the challenges coming from social media were starting to brew. And we're dealing with it and working through it now. But during the first election of Donald Trump and the rise of fake news, as he would put it, we would have Russian stories, Russian meddling in the election, hate speech. Essentially, social media was a Wild West. And in some ways, you know, X, or formerly Twitter, it still is a Wild West. But anything goes. I mean, people were clicking on articles that were completely false, thinking that it was true. And there was no way to verify any of this, with many, many people getting their news sources from social media. So, you know, this was seen as the opposite of a threat to free expression. It was a threat to democracy in terms of misinformation. So what happened was social media companies got so much heat, the pendulum started swinging the other way. So there were congressional hearings on all the fake news, and you know, there's not enough regulation in social media. So you have Zuckerberg saying, you know, nothing to see here, when Facebook had basically killed the objective truth during, you know, that 2016 election. So during these congressional hearings in 2018, that's his like mea culpa moment where the Congress was grilling him and he apologized. And there was a shift, you know, with these social media companies that they need to do something. You know, the public sentiment was, this is just, there's too much out there that is not being monitored or regulated. So Facebook and Instagram, which are now one company, Meta, they have been cracking down on misinformation, but they're also, in the net of this, capturing free expression. And in the early days, before Twitter became X, and the CEO was Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk, he finally shut down Donald Trump. This was after one of his early posts was either removed or flagged as a lie. And it was a baby step. And then eventually, after the insurrection, they took down his account. So this is, again, social media's attempt to, let's make sense of this. But it's also troubling to have 3 or 4 CEOs be the, you know, they're the ones that hold the key to what is acceptable speech. So now we have a lot of cartoonists and illustrators are getting caught in this, and our work is getting taken down and censored with corporate censorship and flagged as terrorism, or this one is promoting violence or dangerous organizations, this cartoon here, which is a cartoon that is expressing an opinion that respected foreign policy analysts were saying in our country. So just because of the image and certain things that were flagged, it gets caught in this web, or in this net, I should say, and it's limiting what we can say. This is another one that was taken down after the insurrection. And I mean, it's hard to say. Someone may have just been very offended by this image, so I understand. But I think a lot of it could be individuals complain or object to an offensive image, and then if enough people complain, so Facebook will take it down. Other things that are happening are they have algorithms and AI operating where they'll see a noose here, and if they see a noose in an image, they flag it as racist, take it down. So I've had a dozen different cartoons almost at different points taken down. Most of them don't go back up, and all of them were taken down for the opposite. You know, I was making a point defending, you know, pointing out racism or pointing out terrorism, because I was highlighting it and calling it out. It was flagged as racism or terrorism. So this was taken down, I think, a couple times. The latest one that was taken down was this, which was a very just pro-humanity, pro-civilian cartoon. And this was, again, cartoons, lots of cartoons on this topic, on what's happening in Gaza, are being taken down based on how intense the sides are and passionate. So there's lots of people and just organizations that are determined to silence certain artists or take down certain images. So it's important that we continue to support cartoonists to be able to express any opinion, because as soon as we have fewer freedoms as illustrators, that means as citizens, you also have fewer abilities, or a reduced ability to express yourself. I mean, the cartoonists really do hold the line at free expression. So at the end here, I just have like this is also a free speech oriented cartoon, because this was when Congress voted to potentially, and Biden signed it, to ban TikTok, which to me is another threat to free expression, because of the natures of China. But I mean, look at all the other social media companies. I mean, there's really not a big difference here. Meanwhile, we can't pass a law to keep our kids safe from gunfire. But I wanted to use this one because it has a free speech theme to show you a little bit of the process that I go through for these cartoons. So I'll try to play this brief time lapse, and I apologize if it's not working right. I'm trying to get the sound just right here. Let's see. Really not. Really ignored. I've been making these little videos for like most of my cartoons now. And if you, on the Buffalo News website, oh, hold on, I have an echo here, excuse me. On the Buffalo News website now, I'm creating these little time-lapse clips, which has been a lot of fun. So that's all the cartoons I have, but I will finish with this quote by Teddy Roosevelt, if I can pop this back up here. Because I think this is a great quote by Teddy Roosevelt. It's my favorite. To announce that there must be no criticism of the president, or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but morally treasonable to the American public. Now, if that isn't a full-throated endorsement of free expression, I don't know what is. Conveniently, this was said after he was president, so we could criticize his successor. Nonetheless, it holds as a great quote. So anyway, that's my presentation. I really appreciate everybody being here, and I'd love to take some questions if you have any.